Welcome back. You're watching Morning Express. We continue with the conversation right here in studio. I'm joined by Professor Gitile Naituli from our City Centre studios, Alex Manyasi, and via way of Zoom from Kwale, the Member of Parliament for Matuga constituency, Kasim Tandaza. Gentlemen, thanks for your patience. Let's shift focus to this particular story where the Directorate of Criminal Investigations now says it recovered 5.7 million shillings from a woman alleged to have been on the way to present the money to judges Said Chitembwe and Agri Muchelule. In an affidavit sworn by one Felix Karisa, DCI detectives are believed to have been tipped off that a broker was on the way to present one of the judges with 7 million shillings at his residence for a favorable ruling, but the plan changed and was instead told to take the money to the judge's chamber at the Milimani Law Courts. KTN's Fred Kagonye has more.
The Directorate of Criminal Investigation says its detectives recovered 5.7 million shillings from a woman who they say was to drop off the money to one of the judges. They maintain that Justices Said Chitembwe and Agri Muchelule were not arrested, but they willingly accompanied officers to the DCI headquarters for questioning. In a sworn affidavit, Felix Karisa, an inspector with the Serious Crimes Unit of the DCI, says that they were not able to obtain a search warrant because they did not have time and were acting on a tip-off. He claims that they recovered 700,000 shillings from Justice Chitembwe's chamber and 5 million shillings from a lady who was to present it to Justice Muchelule. In the affidavit, Karisa says he was informed of a plot by a broker to give the judge 7 million shillings for a favorable ruling. The money was to be taken to Justice Muchelule's chamber and Justice Chitembwe was the alleged facilitator. He says that, and I quote, "The DCI was only undertaking lawful investigations into grave allegations related to corruption and cannot be interpreted to mean an encroachment on the independence of the judiciary. The petition to shield the judges is an attempt to stifle and frustrate our work." Last week, Justice Muchelule and the Kenya Magistrates and Judges Association filed a petition and obtained orders stopping the DCI from summoning, arresting or prosecuting them over the bribery allegations.
There was no evidence. The money that was alleged to have been there, the judges have not been furnished with who is the complainant.
Through lawyer Dunstan Omari, they argue that the DCI officers illegally stormed Justices Muchelule and Chitembwe's chambers without any search warrants and did not recover any bribe money as alleged. Fred Kagonye, KTN News.
All right, so detectives claim they found 6.1 million shillings, or rather 6.1 million in US dollars in the chambers of this high courts, or this judges rather, and according to the story, they recovered, it was specifically 5.7 million from a woman who they claim was to deliver the cash to the judges. All this was on a sworn affidavit. Professor, this is interesting, but what do you read from this? Of course, there was clapback in terms of the judges being accosted to the DCI to give their take on certain matters. They weren't arrested, of course, but this coming later on, what do you make of this?
I think before I answer that, I just want to take you back to Mr. Manyasi analysis of the primary actors in the political scene in Kenya. I don't know if you noticed that, or if your viewers noticed, Mr. Manyasi addressed personal interest of the primary actors. There was no national interest on the primary actors in the political scene, and therefore I think he has put a finger on our major weakness as a polity. So having said that, now let me answer your question. I think in a situation like that, that what the police, in the police language, it's called a sting operation. A sting operation involves you wiring the informant to collect information so there is what is called a probable cause to act. I want to assume that the police have that, because out of that, then is another story altogether that I won't try to venture in, but I want to assume that for the police to move, and they move like that, because even swearing an affidavit, you are swearing an affidavit under oath, that is under penalty of perjury. So you must know what you are talking about. So we have to wait for this fact to emerge.
Okay. As we wait, Alex Manyasi, add your voice to this. Well, what say you about the investigations and this sworn affidavit that that will definitely spin this whole story?
Yes, Jesse. When this broke out, first of all, we were told, I think it was Omari who had said that there was nothing that was found in those offices. So now we are hearing that there was money that was found in those offices, which is interesting and telling. So we don't know which version of the story then is correct. Number two, I am just looking at the loopholes in the process. If someone was going to deliver money and large sums of money to an office, and therefore you intercept the person before they hand over money, what is the possibility and likelihood that then you'll pin the person to the money that was being sent to the person that you have arrested or escorted to DCI? That's why sometimes I have difficulty understanding how our security agencies then pin down people when it comes to successful prosecution. Because once it comes to the aspect of prosecution, assuming that these judges were to be charged in court, even though there's an injunction already, then how do you make sure that you sustain a successful case against them? This is why we have had a lot of fiascos in Kenya before, and you end up with cases that don't go anywhere because of the way they handled at the investigation level. And I have said many times, even on this show, that I always believe that cases are lost not in court at the evidence level, but the way they're handled by the time they end up in court. And this is something that you're going to see. But having said that, it's common knowledge that in this country, there's a lot of justice that is being bought. That we have had many times. There has been a lot of allegations, and therefore the only way to arrest this, and this can be, sometimes you don't have to have witnessed or seen. You can see the way cases are handled, the time it takes, the tons of events, and you see that there's something that just doesn't sound right. And so ultimately, for us to have a clean country, the DCI and the security agencies need to do their work properly. They need to have a system which can then produce cases and have files that are taken to court which can actually be sustained. If that is not done, then we will keep talking about corruption, interference of courts, of the judiciary, which in my view, if you talk about interference of the judiciary, yes, the judiciary is supposed to be independent. But at the same time, then who checks the judiciary? Who checks if there's corruption in the judiciary? What if the Judicial Service Commission is unable to deal with it? What if the internal systems that have been put up are unable to deal with it? Where do Kenyans go if there's corruption in the judiciary? So all of us need to agree as a country that if we're going to deal with matters corruption, then we have to deal with it wholesome. We cannot have a scenario where certain arms of government, like for example, we were having the other day where the parliament was supposed to summon, I think, the registrar, and the registrar was putting up a fight and saying that there's independence of the two arms of government. So we have had this so many times, and it's about time that then as a country we decided how we want to handle our affairs between the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. Every time there's something at the executive holding on to judges, the judiciary will say that it's not the responsibility of the executive. The legislature, on the other hand, DCI arrests people, and the judiciary then is saying that is interference. Then at the end of the day, to whom does a Kenyan go when another arm of government is misusing its opportunity and responsibility to serve Kenyans?
Okay, critical questions right there, especially on interference of the judiciary and how these arms of government are supposed to work with each other, even in the midst of independence. Kasim Tandaza, briefly add your voice to this. What you think the loopholes are, even as you perhaps add your voice to the independence of these three arms of government, even as they work together?
Jesse, the issue of the independence and different arms of the government working independently, that is the best way that it should be. But of course, they cannot work totally independent because we are in one Kenya serving the same people. And somehow, for sure, we need some checks and balances. For this particular matter, Jesse, without going into the details, because I'm not privy to the details of whether one had the money or did not have, but I'm not really happy at this point the way DCI is handling some matters corruption. It appears that this time they are so good that they can act on a tip-off and prevent an activity, a criminal activity or a felony, which is the way it should be. We should not be waiting until it happens. And then now we go back to history. If they can be able to do that, then kudos to them. But then it surprises me that during the KEMSA scandal, which happened over time, they somehow did not get anybody to tip them off. And if they were tipped off, they could not do anything at that time. And even after all the facts have emerged and they are in public domain on how money was stolen, and huge sums of serious money is meant for sick people who were stolen, up to now they have not been able to get any meaningful tip-off. They have not been able to get any credible information for them to act. Remember, Jesse, on the same issue of the judiciary, there were some judges who would not be sworn in because they had integrity issues. Integrity in Kenya means corruption-related issues.
Okay.
And up to now, those judges are still serving in their previous capacity. They were not promoted, but they are still in the system. And apparently, the DCI or the ESCC or any other arm of government has not been able to get a serious tip-off or serious information to charge these people, and they're still serving. The same judges that now are in question, they are still back into their stations of work. So I think we are actually putting the judiciary in a situation where the general public loses faith. What happens to somebody who appears before such a person, such a judge now, given that in the public domain, he is a corrupt, there was some monies, before it is proved, but at least already that is what is out in the public domain. So I think the DCI can actually do better. They can do a lot in terms of giving faith, gaining credibility in the eyes of the public. Remember, justice is not just when it's done. It has to appear to have been done. It has to be to make people be convinced that justice is being done. And I think that is the point that the DCI and especially the investigating agencies and the judiciary are really missing. And I think going forward, there is a likelihood that Kenyans might start losing faith in these organs, and which is a very dangerous position for any country to reach that point. Yes.
Exactly. More details on that particular intrigue between the DCI and these two judges on page 8 of the Daily Nation, even as the Standard highlights it on page 7. But gentlemen, let's just highlight something brief that's happening in Parliament. I'll just start with you, Kasim Tandaza. What is termed as what's termed as the BBI Plan B, quote unquote. We saw some church leaders come out in contention to this. What say you about it? First of all, the proposal to have members of parliament and also those in the Senate sort of also represent in terms of cabinet secretaries. Do you think this is a good move, especially when it comes to the functions of oversight, even as we take a look at the accountability issues? Kasim.
Let's look at our history. Previously, before the 2010 Constitution, the ministers, now called cabinet secretaries, all used to come from the government. You had to come from parliament. You had to be in parliament for you to be appointed one, either elected or nominated, but you had to sit in the chambers. And along the line, well, Kenyans thought that that was not good enough. We need technocrats, people from outside. And we've experimented that now for 10 years. Now, what are the lessons learned? From where I sit, Jesse, to be very brief, I think the current scenario is the best, where you need a combination of both. Why do I say so? You know, sometimes, just like the president who has to be elected, he's an executive, but he's still a politician. There are some decisions which cannot purely be made on the basis of some technical information. Given that given the scenario, given our geographical formation of the country that we have, given our regional, given our tribal, these are issues that have to be faced realistically on the ground. So for this particular bill, if it comes to the House, I can assure you I'll support it on the basis of gaining that, combining the two, given the way our session is. We need some technical decisions purely based on technical information, but that has also to be coupled with the political realities of this country.
Okay.
It has been very difficult most of the time for us who are representing people to deal with the technocrats from where they sit. So, and remember, this is also quite, it is within the law. Taking some bits which are in the BBI and bringing them to Parliament if they can gain the 2/3 majority for them to change the constitution, I think that is the way to go. And I don't think this will be the last bill which will be coming to Parliament in terms of that which we think is good and which can pass.
Okay.
Because I know the challenges in most time is the 2/3, which has to be gained in Parliament when it comes to changing the constitution. But I think this one will get an overwhelming support.
Quite so. It seems members of Parliament and those of the Senate will have a tough time defending their seats since there will be so much clamor for these positions. Alex Manyasi, from a governance point of view, is this good for the country in case this bill makes it to law, where we have those members of Parliament, actually cabinet secretaries in Parliament? Will it boost accountability from where you sit?
Just taking cue from the Member of Parliament, there's no evidence so far for the last 8 or 9 years or so that having technocrats as cabinet secretaries or ministers for that matter makes governance improve in the ministries and therefore service delivery. To be honest, unless there was a problem with the presidency, the current scenario has completely failed. I say it completely failed because I was privileged to have had access to some cabinet secretaries, especially in the first 5 years of Uhuru's government. And when they joined government, they were completely unable to even understand how government runs and how things function within government. Some of them took the first 2 years trying to figure out even how to get letters typed. I remember I was in one cabinet secretary's office, and we had talked about something that needed to be done, and she was honest to tell me that even for a letter to be typed, she had to go and stand by the secretary to have that done. And some of them didn't even know how, for example, if you were to transfer a public servant from one office to another. Remember, it's not easy to even fire a public servant, leave alone get them do anything. So it became very difficult for them to get work done. Secondly, it doesn't sometimes mean that if you are a successful corporate person, then automatically when you get into a government office, you know exactly what to do and you succeed. It's not obvious. And so getting someone who understands the way the system works is usually important. I wish the imagination that getting technocrats into government meant that, for example, you have someone who has experience working with government. But this was not the case. However, if you look at balancing with the politicians and getting people who have had political inclinations or influence, and then get into being cabinet secretaries, two things happen. Number one, these people understand the challenges that Kenyans go through. Some of these people who are appointed, and maybe I could be falling into that category, have been working in the corporate sector for so long. They have been having international jobs. But when it comes to understanding what Mwananchi goes through, they have nothing to offer in terms of understanding what that means. And therefore, even when you come up with the policies that end up being approved by cabinet, to chart how the nation then is supposed to move forward, then which Kenyan are you representing? But lastly, in terms of the advantage of having someone who sits in parliament, being in cabinet, the ability to balance between what Mwananchi wants and what the nation wants is critical, in the sense that when we talk about the aspect of representation, and the aspect of being asked questions in Parliament about what you're doing about certain aspects. You could not be having Parliament, for example, doing sermons to cabinet ministers who don't show up, some of them sending junior officers to Parliament to represent them, some of them claiming they're busy or they're on trips. But when ministers are in the House, then they will hear firsthand what the requirements of Parliament are, and therefore could then respond to issues as they should be. And I say that because if you look at the current scenario, for instance, the rains have failed in most parts of the country. I have not seen, for example, the Minister for Agriculture speak about this. If the Minister for Agriculture was a member of Parliament, for instance, then he could be knowing by now that next year we are having a disaster in terms of hunger for Kenyans. Most parts of Rift Valley and Western region, there are no rains. The maize have dried up in the farms. So when we look at the practicability of looking at aspects and issues that are affecting Kenyans, it's important that people who sit in Parliament and who understand and go to their homes in the weekend, some of these people, you could be having a regional balance and you have a minister appointed from Western, but that minister lives in Mombasa. How do they even understand the issues that Kenyans go through? So I think it's important to balance between looking at technocrats running the affairs of ministries and ministers who understand the aspects of Kenyans. And by the way, to just add to that, the PSs, the permanent secretaries, are supposed to be the professionals. They are supposed to be the technocrats. So it doesn't matter whether the minister is a politician or not.
Well noted, Manyasi. You've definitely belabored on that point. Professor, just add your voice. Do you agree or not?
I don't understand Manyasi's argument, because you're talking about technocrats as if we have a group of Kenyans here called the technocrats, then we have a group here called the politicians. These Kenyans you are calling technocrats, they are the ones who have MPs. They are the same people who've been in that parliament. So I think, let's think deeper. Problem is there is no problem with the law as it is right now. The problem is we actually didn't implement it. Because what was meant by separating oversight and the executive functions was that when I'm electing my cabinet as a president, I will strictly go to experts. If I want an agriculture minister, I want somebody so well published in agriculture who knows what he is doing in that ministry. If I want an health minister, I want a specialist in that region, the best Kenyan you can get in that area. And therefore, these fellows will do their job appropriate. That was the idea of the framers of the Constitution. So the fact that we have not followed that, because also the framers, what they had in mind is the parliamentary committees will have serious power to spin you to come. If you don't come, they can actually send you to jail. So we didn't implement, we didn't put all those things in the place, and therefore I don't think it makes any difference which Kenyan becomes a minister, because the people who don't go to parliament are the same people we are calling, what do we call them again?
Technocrats.
Technocrats. These are just the same people.
Okay. Freedom of ideas. Let's see what actually transpires, because that bill is set to undergo public participation, I think, in roughly 11 counties, even as we expect it to come into law, if it will, by the end of this particular year. But let's talk about health matters. Professor, I don't know if you've seen the trend, but curfew is currently trending. I don't know, Kenyans are expecting direction from the government in terms of these containment measures, even as page 10 of the Nation highlights how Kenyans have been throwing caution to the wind. 13%, that is the current positivity rate. It's up from 10.3% last week. And of course, we just received roughly 800,000 doses from the UK following President Uhuru Kenyatta's visit. In context, what do you think is the way forward right now? Should we expect more curfew or less lockdowns and more reopening of the economy, even as we focus on vaccination?
I think the government has done a good job in protecting us in this respect of COVID. And I think if we continue with this carelessness, then the strong arm of government should come and put that in place. So I would expect probably more curfews unless we start in disciplining ourselves. We can't discipline ourselves. We have been seeing all the campaigns in Kiambu, some road shows. I think we have a problem as a people. We are not able to really follow the protocols, and these are very important. And if we don't follow, then the government will be left with no choice, but probably we need to put a lockdown. So the government has a responsibility to protect life and property.
Exactly.
So if you want to avoid that, then let's follow the Ministry of Health protocols.
Okay, Kasim, there are those who argue that putting a curfew is sort of postponing the problem. Once you open up the area, the infection rate will go up, then you impose another curfew. So you sort of get the drift where those Kenyans who are arguing that way sort of come from. What say you about this? Because there's an area in this country that's still under lockdown in the western region following that Madaraka Day celebrations feat. What say you about this?
I think it's not about the curfew, it's not about the lockdown. It is the way it is implemented, it is the way it is enforced. That's where the problem is. And yet, there should be no problem given that this disease is individual and is spread by individuals. So, all what you need, what should have been done and more effort put is in sensitizing the Kenyans, making them understand that they owe their health to themselves, and that will be it. Otherwise, for me, I think the way it's being enforced, there are some areas where it is really hurting the Kenyan person. It's not helping the Kenyan person. Remember, on the side of the night ban travel for buses, especially for road transport. This, to me, is an area that should not have been done. Why should you stop buses flying between Mombasa and Nairobi, and yet you are allowing SGR to operate? In my view, the way the sitting arrangement is in SGR is more congested than the way some seats in the buses actually configured. But you say there should be no night travel in a bus, but night travel allowed. Remember, a bus which leaves before 10 in Mombasa will arrive well past the curfew hour, that is after 4 a.m. in Nairobi. And you can enforce the sitting arrangement. These people, it's an express travel. They are not going to be dropping on their way and picking people. They have always been having those express travels. But the logic of now enforcing a night travel in buses is totally unrealistic. I was in Nyandarua the other weekend. As we were doing our politics, the way Professor was saying, we attended a function in a church compound where the people were very orderly, well seated, there was social distancing. And the pastor said something which was very interesting, that why should the government place places of worship together with bars? That because when they normally enforce this curfew thing, they always put restrictions in places of worship. And yet, they allow markets to operate. They allow, of course, matatus to operate, where certainly it is more difficult to enforce social distancing in a marketplace than in a places of worship, be it in a church or in a mosque. So I think going forward, we need actually to go down. The government needs to go down, actually to go into specific areas where curfew should apply, like in bars and whatever, right. That is okay. But in some sectors of the economy, in some sectors of where people need some soul nourishment, like places of worship, these are areas where I think only putting the protocols, which are even easier to maintain, should be allowed to operate. Okay. Otherwise, going forward, all right, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to observe the Ministry of Health guidelines, and the government should put more emphasis on these areas in terms of obeying and following those protocols.
All right, more details on today's dailies, even as we expect more information from the government in terms of the restrictions and the way forward, even as the vaccination drive is ongoing. Allow us to take a short break. When we come back, we'll focus on matters economy.